Hello, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Jacob with the International Socialist Organization. Thank you for coming to Red Green Alliance, building a radical party of the left as an alternative to the Democrats. We're going to have 3 speakers tonight. Our first speaker will be Jess, a student activist here on campus, a member of the International Socialist Organization. Our next speaker will be Bruce Dixon, managing editor of Black Agenda Report and co-chair of the Georgia Green Party. Our final speaker will be Jill Stein, Green Party presidential candidate, also ran in 2012. Jill ran in 2012 where her campaign was distinguished. She was distinguished for being arrested for trying to enter the Democratic debates. She was arrested for protesting housing foreclosures and arrested for protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. So let me explain the format a little bit. I'm going to be the chair, so that'll come in later on. But each speaker is going to speak for about 20 minutes. After that, we'll have considerable time for audience participation. We encourage you to pose questions, bring out ideas, answer each other's questions. We'll talk more about that after the speakers. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Jess.
Hi, I am Jess from the ISO. Thank you guys so much for coming out. With that, I'll go ahead and get started. So recent events illustrate the state of the world and the state of our nation when we look to the recent strikes at Mizzou that have been effective with reaching their demands, but the students now face the fear of racist backlash from other peers. Even looking to the Democratic debates last night, we can see a hawkish discussion inspired by the recent crisis in Paris and resurfacing of the war on terror. Where are we going to make our voices heard? And how does this fit in with what we want? We have grown up in America with the idea that the way to make our voices heard is through choosing one of 2 candidates every 4 years. If we don't like either candidate in this 2-party system, then at least we can choose the one that isn't Donald Trump. And if the representative that we choose doesn't instill the change we needed or wanted, well then at least we have the right to bitch about it on Facebook. This doesn't sound like democracy to me. The reality of our democratic system is that both of these parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are very much entrenched in the capitalist system of profit and repression. I'm going to start off with a few presidential Democrats that often acted in opposition to the labor that they represented in word alone. So starting with FDR, he entered the presidency on a no foreign wars platform and positioned the U.S. to join World War II. He also set up the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, which are still both ongoing tools of American financial imperialism. Harry Truman, a seeming proponent of labor, invoked the Taft-Hartley Act 12 times within his first year to break strikes. Not only was he against labor at home, but he was a defender of the empire abroad when he approved 2 atomic bombs to be dropped on Japan. His Truman Doctrine authorized U.S. troops to intervene anywhere to defend free enterprise against communism. Now looking to John F. Kennedy with his foreign policy, you can see that the Bay of Pigs invasion, which is an attempted invasion of Cuba by CIA-sponsored group in 1961 to instill a leader that would benefit America's economic interests. It was mainly unsuccessful. Looking to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a peak in nuclear tensions between the USA and the USSR over American nuclear missiles placed in Turkey and Italy, causing a Soviet response to position missiles in Cuba. You can also see that he escalated the war in Vietnam when in 1962 he created the Military Assistant Command of Vietnam, which increased the U.S. troop presence from around 1,000 to 15,000. He also instilled strategic hamlets, which were designed to separate pro-South Vietnamese peasants from possible Viet Cong, which essentially became forced labor camps. Looking at some of his domestic policy, you can see that he was supported by 70% of black people. He publicly supported civil rights activists, but was reluctant to force reforms through legislation due to fear of losing Southern Democrats. Even looking to Nixon, who, while not a Democrat, largely downplayed his civil rights record to appeal to Southern whites and made Kennedy seem to be the better candidate. Nixon chaired the 1953 committee to eliminate federal discrimination. and in 1959, the Senate Southern Democrats filibustered the bills and succeeded in watering down their strongest divisions. And when the Southerners demanded that violators of the new Civil Rights Bill have the right to jury trials before all white Southern juries, Democratic Senator John F. Kennedy voted with the South, while Republican Vice President Richard Nixon broke a tie in the Senate to kill the Southern Amendment. He also delayed signing House discrimination executive order for 2 years until the NAACP pressured him to in 1962. This is an effective example of how pressure from below gets our representatives to move more than they would ever do without pressure from movements below.
That's right.
Bill Clinton, pretty relevant, who also enacted 2 tough on crime bills during his presidential time that put more cops on the street and enforced tougher mandatory sentencing for nonviolent offenses like drug possession, and which further perpetuates the prison industrial system. The Clinton administration used its influence with leading environmental lobbyists, most of them Democrats, to persuade them to support the North American Free Trade Agreement and a Clinton-sponsored compromise that opened northeastern old-growth forests to logging. After Bill Clinton endorsed the 1996 bill repealing aid to families with dependent children, and Nation columnist Katha Pollitt denounced her fellow liberals for holding their fire against Clinton because they feared what Republicans would do. Her quote is, "These liberal groups are caught up in mainstream electoral politics, which in practice means clinging to Clinton and the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, they preach the gospel of the lesser of two evils, that ever downward spiral that has brought us to pass, and that will doubtless end with liberals in hell organizing votes for Satan because Beelzebub would be even worse." I like the imagery there. So, now to Obama. Obama's 2008 campaign had only 26% of its money come from contributions of $200 or less. I can mention the multiple failings of Obama's presidency: implementation of drone strikes, approval for Shell to drill offshore Alaska, and his Obamacare that filled some potholes but remained committed to the corporate healthcare system that protects insurance companies and big pharmacy profits. But it's all pretty apparent and fresh in our minds. In 2008, as Obama's campaign neared an end, the Great Recession had been in full swing for almost a year and a half. This campaign was a social movement that elicited more young black voters to head into the polls than in years past. But his promises of change seemed to be swept under the rug, as banks were bailed out and homeowners were left to deal with foreclosures on their own. How do we respond to this when no one else would? The Occupy protests. The violence and human rights violations by Israeli forces continue to make themselves apparent, and the U.S. government doesn't lift a finger, but continues to militarize Israeli forces. And how do we respond when no one else will? The boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. Finally, the institutional racism and continued violence by police forces against the black community have only seen a response through increased deaths carried out by police officers. And how do we respond when no one else will? The Black Lives Matter movement. When will we realize that the demands we are making fall on deaf ears of Democrats that we have elected into office? When will we ask for someone else, a representative outside of the current two-party duopoly that can challenge the political system as it stands? Now, cut to Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed socialist who speaks to many of these demands, but does so within the Democratic Party, a party that has consistently put its pro-labor rhetoric behind the interests of the corporations that finance them. The contradiction of the Sanders campaign is that if the U.S. political system is an oligarchy, then the Democratic Party, whose presidential nomination he is trying to win, is one of the two major pillars upholding this oligarchy. While Sanders largely speaks to the working class on issues that concern them, he also acts as an agent within the Democratic Party to pull more radicalized workers back into the fold of the Democrats. This can even be seen with Clinton, as she has changed her stances on issues in relation to the reaction to the Sanders campaign. What will happen when or if Sanders loses the Democratic nomination? His endorsement of whoever wins the ticket, most likely Hillary, guarantees a certain percentage of his supporters will be enveloped in the Clinton campaign, effectively pulling these workers back into a two-party system that has already failed them. The left has involved itself with the Democratic Party in many instances, such as the Rainbow Coalition of Jesse Jackson in 1984 and 1988, or Students for a Democratic Society, who endorsed Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964, who thereafter sent 500,000 troops to Vietnam shortly after winning the elections. This brings us back to Sanders, who has supported the Democratic presidential candidate for many elections now instead of genuine left-wing independent alternatives. Rather than pulling Democrats to the left, Bernie entering the party requires an accommodation to the big money and elite politicians who really own and control it. While some believe the ISO should join the Sanders campaign, we cannot support a campaign that tries to win as many votes as possible inside the Democratic Party, a party that revolutionaries cannot support. Instead, we believe we should be upfront with the supporters and engage in a discussion about why Sanders, who is asking so many of the right questions, has pledged allegiance to a party that has all the wrong answers. Sanders is constantly calling for a political revolution. But what does a political revolution really look like? And what does the revolution he calls for look like? Leon Trotsky effectively describes a political revolution when he says, "The most indubitable feature of a revolution is the direct interference of the masses in historical events. At those crucial moments, when the old order becomes no longer endurable to the masses, they break over the barriers excluding them from the political arena, sweep aside their traditional representatives, and create their own interference for the initial groundwork for a new regime." It seems pretty straightforward. Bernie Sanders' idea of a political revolution falls a little short of what would be necessary to really take on corporate power when he talks about increased voter turnout and raising public consciousness. It seems as if working within the system that has caused problems like income and wealth inequality is the proposed route. The Green Party highlights some key issues in its platform that, if implemented, would alter the system itself and be the beginning of some revolutionary change. For instance, here are a few of these bullet points. Working to create new types of political organizations which expand the process of participatory democracy by directly including citizens in the decision-making process. We support a restructuring of social, political, and economics away from a system which is controlled by and mostly benefits the powerful few to a democratic and less bureaucratic system. We call for the replacement of the cultural ethics of domination and control with more cooperative ways of interacting that respect differences of opinion and gender. These are just some of the ideas which focus on replacement of programs, which is a revolutionary idea. Internationally, mass protests and anti-austerity or anti-capitalist electoral campaigns have come together in mutually reinforcing, if complex and contradictory ways, including Caesarea in Greece, Podemos in Spain, the Left and Workers' Front in Argentina, Jeremy Corbyn's left-wing campaign to lead the Labour Party in Britain, an array of fights in Ireland, Scotland, and South Africa. All this raises big questions about how to understand the Sanders campaign, his decision to run within the decidedly pro-capitalist and pro-austerity Democratic Party, and what can be done to transform Sanders' slogan of a political revolution into a sustained movement that doesn't live and die with Sanders as an individual. It is important to understand the history of independent parties within the political realm of the U.S. and how they have so effectively been excluded from mainstream politics. Let's first look to the People's Party, the Populists, that culminated in 1891 in response to neglect to trade union demands, especially in regards to the Knights of Labor and the Colored Farmers Alliance. They scored a major win in the 1890s with representatives elected to state legislatures and Congress. And between 1892 and 1896, populist presidential candidate James Weaver took more than 1 million votes, 22 electoral votes, and 5 states. In response to these large gains, the Democratic Party promptly changed its rhetoric to weaken populist appeal and co-opted some of the populist most banal demands, including coinage of free silver. Over time, the populist movement was absorbed into the Democratic campaign. This outright attack on independent movements can be seen through the Green Party itself in the former campaign of Ralph Nader, who won 2.9 million votes in 2000 election, which is a huge base of votes for an independent party. The Democrats utilized the common strategy of both independent parties acting as a spoiler vote, as well as the idea of lesser evilism, claiming that a vote for Nader is a vote for Bush. While the Nader campaign is still largely blamed for the role in Bush's presidency, the party duopoly fails to point to the larger role of the Republican Party in preventing a recount in Florida that could have put Gore on top and given him a narrow victory in the Electoral College. This is all not to mention that ballot access laws are purposely difficult to navigate and work in order to prevent viable independent alternatives from accessing the ticket anyways. North Carolina, in fact, is the second state in the nation behind Texas with the strictest ballot access laws, including 89,000 signatures to even get on the ballot, not to mention the challenges faced in determining whether the signatures are even legitimate. Even voting for candidates that do not make it on the ballot becomes more difficult when Republicans gain grounds in legislatures and enact harsh voter ID laws that make it hard for people to vote against them. These laws blatantly affect poor people and people of color disproportionately, the very people likely to vote against them and for alternatives. From early on, the rules of the U.S. political system have been written by the two parties that have dominated it, substantially preventing third parties from entering the race, let alone winning. This is true in political systems throughout the world. Dominant parties write the rules, mostly guaranteeing that they stay on top. So why do socialists participate in elections at all if we want system change and not gradual reforms, reforms typically being the main realm representatives work in? As socialists, we fight for all reforms that improve the conditions of life for workers under capitalism and give workers the confidence to fight for more. Karl Marx put it eloquently when he said, "Even when there is no prospect whatsoever of their being elected, the workers must put up their own candidates in order to preserve their independence, to count their forces, and to bring before the public their revolutionary attitude and party standpoint." Campaigns can be a means to deepen movements on the ground and encourage these people to continue these movements. We do not, however, rely on the method of legislative reform in place of grassroots movements and social revolution. Socialists are largely criticized as abstentionists when it comes to elections, but revolutionaries do not abstain nor support candidates in every election. We participate in elections where a viable independent party exists that largely represents the working class and demands of the many. Today, real gains can be seen by socialists entering into legislative power. Kashama Sawant, a socialist city council member in Seattle, has won 2 major campaigns within the past 2 years. She has been a prominent member of the Fight for 15 campaign and has one of the highest approval ratings citywide of any city council member. Because of her election success and prominent left-wing demands, she has become a symbol throughout the country that a democratic, anti-racist, feminist, socialist alternative to the Democratic Party is possible. Howie Hawkins' Green Party campaign for New York governor is another example of the importance of elections. Previous Governor Andrew Cuomo stripped $2 billion from schools, froze the wages of state workers, and cut all public sector pensions in order to cover his Startup NY program, which allows manufacturers pay no state taxes for 10 years. The Howie Jones campaign has given the frustrated teachers' unions and other fed-up New Yorkers another option besides the Democrats that have caused the uproar in the first place. Lastly, the Syriza Party, coalition of the radical left in Greece, largely surprised many when they defeated the traditional bourgeois parties in January 2015 to form a new program within the government based on reversing austerity measures. This shows a tremendous base of people within another nation that finds their cries heard by non-traditional parties of the left. It's important to understand that the use of elections is just one means through which we can make advances for the workers, and in this case, protest the two-party system. Grassroots movements and work on the ground demonstrate the will of the masses to a degree that is unrivaled within the electoral system. We push our politicians when we strike, when we protest, and when we stand up and say police brutality should be eradicated. Electoral politics can only go so far, and they are not a means to an end. Our voices, our hands, our feet that shake the ground draw the attention of the nation and the world to the revolutionary demands that we lay down, and we must not forget this. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Jess. I'm just going to go ahead and pass it down to Bruce Dixon, Managing Editor of the Black Agenda Report and co-chair of the Georgia Green Party.
Yeah, do I need to start my own timer here? So
We have you.
Bruce, I got you. You want to use your own, since we're so far apart.
Please, that'll save me 30 seconds. Hey, I'm Bruce Dixon, and this is my first time in a long time in North Carolina. Usually this is flyover country for me, you know? So anyway, I'm here as part of the Jill Stein campaign today. And I'm also the chair of the Georgia Green Party. This is a little different audience, a little different sort of an audience than the kind of audiences that I usually get to talk to. So I'm going to say some things a little differently, and maybe some completely different things from what I often say. Often the people that I'm talking to are people who are tired of being Democrats. I guess you guys are beyond that, right? Hey, look, I'm not like Bernie, okay? I'm a socialist, all right? I've been one since, geez, almost since I can remember. You know, how can I say this, but voting and elections, I mean, I've done a lot of electoral stuff over the years. Why? Because voting and elections are magic. What do I mean by that? They're magic because nothing in the world can do for us what we really expect voting and elections to do. So they must be magical. They must be. Every autocratic, tyrannical regime in the world right now has elections to justify itself, don't they? Okay? So they must be magic. That's the only explanation we can have for it. Well, but that's kind of a fake magic. The real magic of voting and elections is election time is a time when people are listening. It's a time when people are expecting, though their expectations are rarely satisfied, when they're expecting to hear real discussion about the things that can make their lives better. Real explanations about why things are the way they are. Of course, they rarely get to hear much of this. Rarely. And even less often do they get to vote on anything of consequence that might actually change their lives. I spend a lot of time as an activist inside the Democratic Party. If you'd asked me during the 80s, in the late 70s, in the early 90s, in the mid 90s, was I a Democrat? I'd have told you, heck no, not me. I'm not a Democrat. But in fact, I was what I call a Democrat in denial. There are a lot of Democrats in denial. Still are. I mean, it's a big trial, you know. People who say, well, I'm not a Democrat, I don't go for that stuff, but you know, when it comes down to it, the impulse is to work with people who you think are working with you. But are they really working with you when you work with Democrats? Let's imagine, let's do a thought experiment, all right? Everybody here, I presume, is against mass incarceration, as we understand it. Let's imagine that you're going to run for sheriff on a platform that opposes mass incarceration. Why sheriff? Well, the sheriff, the county sheriffs in most counties in the United States are in charge of the jails, okay? So now if you were running as a sheriff and you're running against mass incarceration, there's probably 4 things you'd want to do right away. Let's suppose you won. You ran as a Democrat, you won the primary, and you won the general. And you did the state certification to be a law enforcement officer. All states require that now. And so now you're the county sheriff. And what's this, Buncombe County? Okay, now you're the county sheriff. You got 4 things you want to do. Number 1, you want to get rid of the bad actors on your staff. Number 2, you're going to want to make sure that people who are in your care, in your jail, have decent food to eat. Number 3, you want to make sure that they've got decent medical care, which they probably are not having now. And number 4, you want to make sure that they have actual educational and self-improvement opportunities. Those 4 minimum things. Minimum things. Now, you're the sheriff now, and you want to make sure those things happen. You're going to have to move some resources around in your little domain as a sheriff, but you're going to need the cooperation of other county authorities, of other authorities on other levels of government, other state authorities. And many of them are going to be in your own party. Are they going to cooperate with you? What do you think? In many cases, they're not going to. In many cases, they're not going to. And they're in your own party. all right? And not only will they not cooperate with you, they may primary you. For those of you who don't understand that jargon, that means they may run someone else in the next primary election, in the next Democratic primary, against you. They may fund your opponent inside your party. And you may have to cross swords with the leaders of the legislature, of the state legislature, who are your party leaders, or your governor, who's your party leader, or your mayor. So you're going to have many, many, many hands against you inside your own party if you ran as a Democrat against mass incarceration and won. This is after you win. And then comes the next November election. What do all Democrat elected officials have to do in November? Each one of them has to go out and mobilize, and you would be expected as the new sheriff, who has obviously had to go out and find people to vote for you who probably haven't voted before. You're going to be expected to bring those votes back and lay them at the feet of the governor and the legislative leaders and all the Democrats who oppose you, and who oppose what you stand for. So the Democratic Party is just not a really practical place to even try to do reforms. You know, it's got built-in barriers to it. If you're going to do these things, you're going to have to step outside the two parties. There really isn't any other alternative. There really isn't. That's why I'm in the Green Party right now. And as I said, I'm a socialist. Now, the Green Party is not a socialist party. We know that. But there's plenty of people in the Green Party who are socialists. So it's a not unfriendly party to socialists. Let's put it that way. In Georgia, where I'm from, I mean, each state gets to, the Green Party nationally is a federation of state parties. And each state gets to make its own rules and say what it's about. In Georgia, we've got a platform that basically says that we are an anti-capitalist party. That's what we say. You know, but that's us. That's us in Georgia. You guys in North Carolina, y'all get to do what you want to do. You know, in New York, they get to do what they want to do. You know, and you know, so the point of it is that, like Howard Hawkins likes to say, if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, you have to go turn on the TV to find out what your party stands for and what your positions are on something. If you build a party and it's a Democratic small d party and your rules are that local county organizations and local state organizations get to make their own rules, well then, that's what you build. That's what you build. And the Green Party is a chance to build something like that. There's a lot of activism out here. You know, I mean, I'm an old guy, and I was young once, a long time ago. So long ago that sometimes I can barely remember it. But I forgot where that was going. Oh yeah. I really did. See, that's what the senior moment is. Yeah, well anyway, what we have a chance to do here is we have a chance to build something. And you've got a chance to build something here in North Carolina. We've got a chance to build something in Georgia. And if you've got an organization, if you've got a party that you run, I mean, really, what is a party? Oh, now I know where I was going here. There's a lot of activism out here among young folks that is individual kind of centered. You know, what people call the anarchist tendency, for lack of a better word. And I don't mean to disparage anarchists and people who are of that stripe, some of my best friends and so forth and so on, you know. But what's lacking there is mutual accountability. And what a party is when we take our separate acts and we make ourselves, we pledge mutual accountability to each other. And that's what the left needs here, is they need a more powerful spirit of party, a more powerful spirit of mutual accountability, you know, and mutual participation in evaluating what it is we do and don't do, and why we do it or why we don't do it. And we really do have to, and while we can get hung up on, gee, I don't want to use the wrong words here, we can get hung up on some of the safe space stuff and all the rest of that. We really do need to work on creating some brand new forms of organization and some brand new forms of cooperation. We really have to break out of the NGO world. A lot of us, I mean, I worked in NGOs during the 80s, and not the 90s, but well, a little bit of the 90s. Yeah, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever it was. And there's a spirit there of course, if you're in the NGO world, who pays your salary? Come on, the funders do, right? You know, so, and what have the funders done for us in the last 30 years? They said that, all right, well, you're going to do climate. You over there, you're going to do safe streets. And you're going to do streetcars, public transportation over there. And each one of us has to work inside of our little thing. But think about it here now. When you're out there organizing people, are the people that you're organizing, are they going to be able to go to a school council meeting on Monday, a climate meeting on Tuesday, a transportation meeting on Wednesday? This is already not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, okay? We have to talk to whole people. We have to try to organize whole people. That's another reason why we need a party, why we need mutual accountability across these lines. And this is something that I hope you'll think about. And lastly, where do we go with this? North Carolina is the state with the heaviest barriers to ballot access of any state in the union. These barriers exist because they're afraid that socialists will get on the ballot. I mean, seriously, that's why they're there. Okay? In Georgia, where I'm at, actually Georgia is the next most difficult state, not Texas. Texas, they got a good deal in Texas. In Texas, Dick Armey, who here remembers Dick Armey? Okay, Dick Armey was in charge of the Texas Republican Party, and he got the bright idea that if Greens were on the ballot, that the Greens need to grow by contesting with the Democrats, which he's right, they do. Although many of us shrink from that. And so Dick Armey said, yeah, well, we want to see Greens on the ballot. So the Republicans went out and paid the money, paid the cash money to get petitioners and all the rest of the stuff to get the Greens on the ballot, handed over the signatures to the Texas Green Party, and now they're on the ballot. That's how it happened. But in Georgia, we've got the next most difficult thing. We've got to get 50,000 signatures, like you got to get 90,000 here. Only ours have to be notarized with circulators and some other nonsense. Indiana, which has about the same population as North Carolina, maybe a little less, needs 22,600 signatures. Pennsylvania needs 26,000. There's a few others like that. But the deal is the Republicans and Democrats passed these measures to protect themselves from you. And to protect themselves also from the choices of their voters. And North Carolina, if this barrier can be overcome in North Carolina, it can be overcome anywhere. And the eyes of everybody are on you guys right now. It's easy. All you got to do is pick up one of these. And most of you have one in your pockets or your purses. And you go to jill2016.com/volunteer and fill out the form and click where it says, I want to circulate a petition. Don't click where it says, I want to be an online activist. I don't know who put that there. We're probably going to take it off of there because we don't even know what an online activist is. Okay? We probably have too many of those anyway. So those are all so we're not looking for online activists here. Okay? We're looking for practical people who want to do practical things to change the world. And like I said, elections are magic and voting is magic because people are listening. If you want to change the world, you've got to convince people and you've got to talk to them when they're listening. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. So Jill's going to speak next, and if everyone, we're going to have some announcements at the end, if everyone will stick around for the audience participation time. There will be a fundraiser tonight at the block, and we'll give the details at the end after the audience participation time. Here's Jill.
Thank you. So thank you to Jacob and Jess and Bruce and to the ISO and to all of you for this very fun and exciting panel. And, you know, I just have to say that I think that this is exactly where it's happening and this is what we need to do. And these are the people in the room that we need in the room to break out in this really historic moment. And no one is better prepared and equipped and empowered to do that than students who are fighting debt, who have every reason to fight back, workers who are fighting debt and unemployment and low wages, and all the rest of us. But that we have this incredible magic moment right now. Bruce is talking about magic. In many ways, this is a magical moment because there is this movement right now for democracy and justice, which is sweeping the planet, and people are rising up right now like we haven't seen in generations, and fighting back to stop the assault of the neoliberal establishment on our economy, our ecology, peace, and democracy. It's like this is the wake-up moment right now. And thank you, everybody in this room, and the ISO and the Green Party for being the force that if we get together, there will be absolutely no stopping us. So, yes, give yourselves a hand. So, you know, I think we have a very special responsibility and a very special opportunity because we are facing this unprecedented crisis, really, in all of history. There's never been anything like what we are facing, this converging crisis across our economy and the climate and our democracy and global peace and security. Those things are all converging, and you can't really solve one of them unless you solve them all. So we're really talking about big, deep, systemic change, not about things around the margins. But this isn't like it's some pie-in-the-sky endeavor. You know, this is an incredible wake-up moment, and it calls for transformational solutions, and those are not coming from corporate political parties that are bought and paid for by predatory banks and fossil fuel polluters and war profiteers. This is going to come from us, from the social movements, and the Green Party really is the one national party right now, which is of, by, and for the people, which is not poisoned by corporate money, and which is really in a position to be able to lift up our voices and help bring us together. So we've got the critical mass, and we have a program really for people, planet, and peace over profit that brings us together and refuses to take no for an answer. I think young people have perhaps the critical role to play here. No pressure, but it's always taken a younger generation to actually push through at a time of social crisis and transformation. And right now that generation has two hands tied behind its back by a debt crisis. And that debt crisis, involves 40 million young people who are indentured servants without really a hope of being able to change that, because the jobs that are coming back now are low-wage, part-time, and temporary. And there's absolutely no sign on the horizon that that's going to change. With the Trans-Pacific Partnership coming up, that's only going to get worse. So there's every reason for young people to stand up right now between the debt crisis, the climate crisis, which falls on your shoulders more than anyone else, the jobs crisis, the expanding wars, which, as we saw in the tragic, horrific events in Paris, that war is blowing back right now to our shores. We need to change all this, and it will be the young people who are standing up and who are in this room who are leading the charge. So thank you for that. I think that the debt thing is not only a hardship for a generation, it's actually crippling for our entire economy. It's like 70% of all students, it's 40% of all households that are headed by people under 35 are basically strapped by debt. And the non-payment of that debt, basically the default on that debt, is actually more like 40% when you add up the various pauses that are put on repayment. But it's basically people cannot repay those debts. And they're not going to be able to repay those debts under the current system. Now, and therefore it's a threat actually to the whole economy. And it's also it's basically crippling to society. We rely on a younger generation to re-envision the world going forward, to reimagine what society could be like and should be like. That is the duty of the younger generation. And all of society relies on that. And we're not able to tap into that right now. So that's why we have a little program here, and it's called Canceling Student Debt. And here's how it happens. There are 40 million young people who are in debt. A lot of those people are really good at networking and social media and Facebook. I think there are a few of those people in the room here right now. And what happens is that if word gets out that young people can actually cancel student debt by turning out on November 8th of 2016 and checking the box for the only campaign that will cancel student debt, and that's the Greens. We are the only ones who will do that. Bernie Sanders will not. He won't be on the ballot anyhow. But if people come out to cancel that debt, that will actually happen. Why? Because 40 million voters is about what it takes to win a three-way race. So on the issue of debt alone, we actually do have the power to even win this election if young people decide they want to take over this election. So I encourage you to spread that little information that we can actually, young people can actually take over this election simply by deciding to come out and to let your friends and associates know that there actually is a route out of debt. Because if we show up in 40 million numbers to vote Green, the political landscape is forever changed. The president cannot tell the Fed what to do, however, and the Fed basically has the authority to do a quantitative easing, which we did for the banks, right? To the tune of 17 trillion, isn't it about time we did that for the students? It's far less to bail out the students, it's like 1.3 or 1.4 trillion. If we came up with 17 trillion, we can come up with 1.4 trillion to bail out the students. So the president can't instruct the Fed to do this quantitative easing and basically cancel debt. However, the president can appoint the Fed and make sure that the appointees are going to do what needs to be done. So that is our first commitment. On the day that Greens take office, this would be the first act of our administration, is to essentially cancel student debt in order to liberate the driving force for the real revolution that needs to take place. That will happen. So this is in part by way of making the larger point here, and I'll quote Alice Walker, who said basically to the effect that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. But in fact, we do have it. We have enough young people to win a three-way race. Add to that, 1 out of every 2 Americans now is either in poverty or low income heading to poverty, with the new jobs being created basically being low-wage poverty jobs. The political misleaders are very quick to tell us that we are in a recovery, right? Anybody out there think we're in a recovery? Anybody think we're in an emergency? Yes, I would say it's an emergency, not a recovery, for all kinds of reasons. And that creates a lot of people who really want to see this change. 1 out of 3 African Americans, men, are basically held hostage by the prison industrial state, and they may not be able to vote because they've had their vote taken away from them. However, they have friends and relations who vote. There are 25 million Latinos who vote, and who also vote on behalf of the 12 million undocumented Americans who deserve their human rights and a right to citizenship. So you put us together and we are an absolutely unstoppable movement. What's lacking in this movement, I think, is faith in the political system, for good reason. Because the political system has certainly earned everyone's distrust. I myself got tricked into running for office for the first time in 2002, being one of those people who had absolutely no interest in the political system or in being a part of the Democratic or Republican parties. I had never been political, except to go to Ralph Nader meetings that began to really change my idea of what the political system could do. I was a, what should we say, a disgruntled medical doctor that realized that just giving people pills and medical procedures and pushing them back out to the things that are making us sick to start with was kind of not the solution we needed. Anyhow, I got recruited as a disgruntled doctor to help communities fight predatory establishments, coal plants, incinerators, toxic waste sites, etc., trash transfer stations, things that are making us sick, polluting our air and our water and our fish that a lot of people still eat. And so I got recruited to fight this, and basically I became, what should we say, a doctor that practiced no longer clinical medicine, but now political medicine, because it's the mother of all illnesses. And we've got to fix this one in order to fix the things that are literally killing us. Anyhow, being one of those people who did not trust the political system one iota, I got recruited to run by the Green Party, saying, do what you're doing, fighting incinerators and coal plants and working to establish jobs that are healthy for workers and healthy for communities, like recycling jobs or jobs in clean renewable energy and conservation and all that. We got plenty of jobs. And I then kind of thought, well, okay, you know, let's go talk to our elected officials and let them know about all these good things that we can do, and quickly discovered that's the last thing in the world you want to do. So at any rate, I sort of joined the effort here to transform the political system. And there are a lot of folks out there who aren't voting for good reason because there's been nothing to vote for. And in fact, a word about the lesser evil, because the lesser evil pretends to be a solution. But what it is actually is a propaganda campaign in order to silence the political opposition. All the reasons that people are told to vote for the lesser evil, because you didn't want the massive Wall Street bailouts, because you didn't want the offshoring of our jobs, because you didn't want this vicious attack on immigrants or African Americans by the police, because you didn't want this ever-expanding immoral war, because you didn't want the meltdown of the climate, right? All those were the reasons people were told to vote for the lesser evil. But what did we actually get from the Obama administration? By the droves. All of those things, far worse. He made George Bush look like a wimp on every count by delivering all those things. So, you know, the little motto we have is that the politics of fear actually delivers everything we are afraid of. It delivers it. Whether by intent or whether by default, it does. And you can look at what happened in North Carolina as kind of an example. What happened in North Carolina? The Democrats lost the legislature, they lost the governorship, Hagan lost her, whatever it was, Congress? Senate. She lost, you know, why did they lose? They lost because they were the lesser evil. They were just one step shy of being as bad as the Republicans. Well, what happens when that's what you offer? People don't come out to vote. They don't come out to vote because they don't have a reason. So the lesser evil gives way to the greater evil, whether they do it themselves or they just, you know, pull the rug out from under political participation in our democracy. We get the greater evil if we give up our principles and our vision. Democracy needs a moral compass. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. We need a vision, we need values, and we need a game plan to get out there and give people something to vote for. And when we do that, we will find that people will stand up in incredible numbers and we can turn this around. So we can create the world that we deserve. We can create the jobs through a Green New Deal, which creates 20 million jobs, living wage jobs, that are full-time for everyone who's not working or working in a lousy part-time job. The Green New Deal guarantees the right to a job. It's like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression, except this also gets us out of the climate crisis. And it will create 100% clean, renewable energy by 2030. In doing that, it revives the economy, it transforms the climate crisis and turns the tide on climate change, and importantly, it makes the friggin' wars for oil obsolete. You don't need them, and you can't justify them. You've got all kinds of energy right here at home. And the final thing about it that few people realize is that it actually creates a health revolution. This actually happened in Cuba when their oil pipeline went down. Cuba has a great healthcare system. That was there when this happened. So that didn't change. What changed was that suddenly there was no more oil being burned, there were no more fossil fuels being burned. People needed to get out their bikes and use public transportation. You didn't have cars choking the street and polluting the air. So people got a lot of exercise getting where they were going and getting to public transit. We need a public transportation system like that. And the other thing that happened, and this is part of the Green New Deal as well, is to create a healthy food system, a healthy, sustainable, local food system, which is necessary in order to tackle the climate problem. It's also necessary in order to gain our health and get our food system back from Monsanto and agribusiness that is throwing us over the cliff. So this is all wrapped up in the Green New Deal, and it fixes this all in one fell swoop. It defies that propaganda out there that says we have to choose between having a planet we can live in and an environment we can survive in, or having jobs. That's absolutely garbage. We can create 3 times as many jobs for every dollar spent on energy if we're spending it on clean, renewable energy, not on fossil fuels or nuclear. And workers, in my experience, are as hungry as anyone. The only reason that workers get browbeaten into supporting the pipelines and the nuclear plants is because they're told they don't deserve a good job. They don't deserve a job that will protect their health and the health of their communities. Well, we say that is absolutely hogwash. That's why we've got to build. In order to solve the climate problem, we have to build in a solution that creates jobs. It's not just about shutting down the fossil fuel industry, it's about creating the economy that we deserve, the jobs that we deserve, the wages that we deserve, healthcare as a human right for everyone through a Medicare for All system. It pays for itself, it doesn't cost us a penny. And education, free public higher education, not only ending student debt, but we need to be providing security for our younger generation. It is an utter shame that we have allowed our younger generation to be turned into a cash cow, to have maximum money squeezed out of it for the economic predators and this predatory political system. It's time to, to support our young people. No society ever survived by devouring its younger generation. And that is what's going on right now. So we're going to stand up on that. We're going to also enact a national action plan for racial justice now and put an end to police violence and a racist political system and the war on drugs by legalizing marijuana and calling a halt so that we are treating, if there are substance abuse problems, we are treating them as public health problems, not as criminal problems. So the bottom line is, we can create this world that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. We can do it together. The Red-Green Alliance is happening. Greens and Socialists have been working together on the ground for years now around the climate crisis. And when we started doing forums together, we said, oh my God, we have exactly the same agenda. What are we doing here? We got the same, we may have slightly different kind of ideologies for explaining that agenda, but it comes down to the same agenda. Socialists really know history. Greens know science and the environment and how to conduct ballot access drives, So you put us together, you got the skill set, that can change the world between how the socialists know through centuries of historic experience organizing on the street and what Greens know about watchdogging the ballot access rules that you have to spend 24/7 on in order to know what's going on. You put us together, this is a marriage made in heaven. We are going to be unstoppable. Young people are going to lead the way. Thank you for making it happen. Join us at jill2016.com, volunteer, and we'll make it happen. Thank you so much.